Welcome, everyone, to the Iris Revenge channel. It was late afternoon in a quiet Midwestern town, the kind of sticky summer heat that made the air shimmer above the asphalt, when the roar of a sleek black sports car shattered the stillness and rolled to a stop outside Bennett's Auto, the last family-owned garage on Main Street. The machine looked like it had come straight out of a movie, gleaming curves, tinted glass rims so polished you could see the clouds reflected. But when the engine cut out, it coughed once and died with a pitiful sputter. A hush fell over the shop. Even the old ceiling fan seemed to pause as if holding its breath. From the driver's seat emerged Derek Whitmore, 35 years old son of the richest developer in the county, his tailored shirt untouched by sweat. Despite the heat, his expression carved into a smirk of practiced superiority. People knew his family's money had built half the city's skyline, and his reputation was just as tall-cold, entitled with the kind of arrogance that could fill a room before he even spoke. He glanced at the modest signage above the garage door, paint, faded letters, chipped and chuckled under his breath, as though fate had played a cruel joke by bringing his broken masterpiece to such a place. Before I continue, let me know in the comments which city or province you're watching this from. I'm always curious to see how far my story has reached. And if this is your first time on the channel, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what comes next, because what's about to happen will be hard to believe. Inside the garage, Claire Bennett tightened her ponytail with greasy hands, her coveralls stained with the day's work, and for a brief moment she thought she was imagining things. That car, worth more than her entire business, looked so out of place among the dusty pickup trucks and aging sedans her shop usually handled. She caught Derek's eye and felt his gaze slice through her like she was nothing more than a joke waiting to be told. Claire had grown up in this garage. It smelled of old oil and faint tobacco, the lingering ghosts of her father's long nights keeping the business alive until his sudden passing 2 years ago left her to run it alone. She was only 27, juggling the shop and raising her 7-year-old son, doing the best she could, while town gossips whispered that the Bennett name was finished. Derek stepped closer, brushing imaginary dust off his cuff, and said in a voice just loud enough for the younger mechanics to hear, "So this is the legendary Bennett's Auto. My father used to talk about it. Never thought I'd actually see it looking like this. Shame, really." The words dripped with disdain, each syllable meant to remind Claire of her place. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay steady because she'd heard worse, and still she was here. She had always believed every broken thing could be fixed machines, people, even her own weary heart. But she never expected that this one afternoon, this one arrogant man, and this one broken car would set her entire life on a path she could never walk back from. Derek didn't even bother lowering his voice as he circled the car, the gold watch on his wrist catching the sunlight like a spotlight on his arrogance. "I'll tell you what, sweetheart," he said, his tone dripping with the kind of mockery Claire had learned to endure but never quite got used to. "If you can get this baby running again, I'll hand you the keys. Hell, I'll even sign the title over. But let's be honest, we both know women don't belong under a hood." The young mechanics in the shop, barely out of trade school, froze with uneasy laughter bubbling in their throats. A couple of them chuckled nervously, not daring to cross Derek, while others looked at Claire with something that stung worse than laughter: pity. Pity that said, "Don't embarrass yourself, just walk away." Claire's face burned hot, not from the summer sun but from the heat of humiliation crawling up her neck. She had heard whispers before, single mom just trying to keep her daddy's name alive, too soft for this business, but never had it been thrown at her so publicly, so viciously, in her own garage, in front of people who worked for her. She wanted to tell him to take his fancy car and his smug face and get out, but her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Never let anyone tell you what you can't fix, Claire Bear. Every machine has a soul, you just have to listen long enough to hear it." Her throat tightened, but she swallowed the lump of rage and hurt, stepping closer until she was standing face to face with Derek. "Deal." she said, her voice steadier than she felt. If I get it running, you hand it over. Not because I want your car, but because I want you to eat those words. The room went silent, like the whole garage had leaned in to hear if she was serious. Derek's smirk widened into something cruel, the kind of grin people wear when they're sure they're about to watch someone crash and burn. Well, this should be entertaining, he sneered, leaning against the tool bench with his arms folded, turning her shop into his personal stage. Claire slid into work, her heart hammering against her ribs as she popped the hood. The engine was a maze of wires and polished steel, more computer than machine, designed to intimidate anyone who wasn't trained in luxury imports. She felt the eyes on her backworkers shifting awkwardly, Derek's gaze heavy with amusement, and for a second her hands trembled. She thought about her son Ethan, probably sitting at the kitchen table right now, sketching superheroes on scrap paper, waiting for the grilled cheese she'd promised. "You're his hero, not his embarrassment," she told herself, tightening her grip on the wrench until her knuckles went white. Minutes passed. Sweat dripped down her temple as she ran diagnostics, listening for the subtle whispers of the engine tracing wires, the way her dad had taught her, patient and unflinching. And then it clicked. A faulty ignition sensor, simple in nature but buried deep enough to stump anyone rushing through the job. She adjusted it, checked the connections twice, and stepped back with her heart pounding. "All right," she said quietly, sliding into the driver's seat. She turned the key. For a breathless moment, the garage held its breath with her. And then the engine roared back to life, smooth and powerful, the sound filling the air like thunder breaking a storm. The mechanics gasped, one of them even clapping before catching himself. Claire exhaled, her chest rising with something between relief and pride. But Derek didn't clap. He didn't smile. He just pushed off the bench, his smirk unchanged. "Beginner's luck." He muttered, his voice slicing the room into silence. "Even a broken clock's right twice a day." And just like that, he turned his back, refusing to honor the promise he'd made. The injustice burned like fire in Claire's chest. She wanted to scream, to demand what was hers, to strip away that smug grin with the truth of what she'd just done. But when she saw the mechanics' faces, some ashamed, some silently cheering her, and some too afraid to show anything at all, she knew the fight wasn't worth it. Not yet. She let the engine purr behind her as she stood tall, wiping the grease from her hands, and said only, "One day, Derek Whitmore, you'll regret underestimating me." And deep down, she knew that moment of humiliation wasn't the end of her story. It was the spark that would ignite the fire of everything that came next. That night, long after the last car had rolled out of the garage and the younger mechanics had gone home whispering about what they'd seen, Claire sat alone at her father's old workbench, the shop silent except for the ticking of a wall clock that hadn't been reset since his passing. The smell of oil clung to her coveralls, her hands still blackened with grease, but it wasn't the dirt on her skin that bothered her. It was Derek's words echoing in her mind, louder than the engine she had just resurrected. "Women don't belong under a hood." She replayed the sneers, the awkward chuckles, the pitying eyes, and though she held her head high in the moment, here in the stillness, she felt the sting like an open wound. She thought about Ethan curled up under his superhero blanket back home and whispered into the empty garage, "I'll show them. I'll show him. You'll never be ashamed of me, kiddo." The next morning, Claire pulled out the battered notebook her father used to keep its pages filled with scribbled diagrams, handwritten reminders, and the kind of wisdom you couldn't find in any textbook. "Every machine has a soul," his handwriting read across the margin, and she ran her finger over the faded ink as though it could give her strength. From that day forward, her nights stopped belonging to sleep. When Ethan was in bed, Claire spread manuals and wiring diagrams across the kitchen table, teaching herself systems. Most small-town shops never touched foreign imports, luxury engines, electronic calibrations. Coffee became her closest ally, exhaustion, her constant shadow, but determination burned brighter than both. Not everyone doubted her. Tommy Harris, a retired truck driver who had been her father's best friend, stopped by the garage one afternoon with a six-pack of soda and a shake of his head. "Kid," he said, settling into the old armchair by the tool cabinet, "your dad would have loved to see that punk's face when you fired up his car. I heard half the town's still buzzing about it." Claire smiled weakly, but Tommy leaned forward, his tone turning serious. "Don't let him break you. Pride like that always crashes harder than the car it rides in. You just keep doing what you're doing. And if you need an extra set of hands, mine aren't too shaky yet." That small offer, that simple faith felt like oxygen after suffocating. Claire began taking jobs. Other shops turned down rusted-out minivans, stubborn trucks, a busted generator at the local diner. The money wasn't much, but every job she finished built her confidence, brick by brick. On Sundays, she'd bring Ethan to the shop, showing him how to hold a wrench or listen for the difference between a healthy hum and a troubled rattle. He'd beam at her like she was the strongest person alive, and it was in those moments she realized this wasn't just about proving Derek wrong, it was about proving to her son, and maybe to herself, that she belonged exactly where she was. Still, doubt lingered like a shadow. Sometimes when she closed her eyes, she'd see Derek's smirk, hear the mocking chuckles, and wonder if the whole town saw her as a fool pretending to be her father. But each time the fear rose, she shoved it back down, whispering, "Not yet. I'm not done yet." And though she didn't know it, every sleepless night, every small victory was laying the foundation for a reckoning that would shake more than just her small-town garage. It would shake the very empire Derek thought untouchable. For a little while, Claire believed things were turning. The diner's generator hummed steadily after her repairs. A grateful owner slipped her free pie with every order, and the rusted minivans she revived started driving through town like rolling testimonials. Folks who had once whispered that the Bennett girl should just sell the place began nodding politely when she passed some, even stopping by with jobs too small for bigger shops to bother with. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And in those early mornings when she pulled the garage door open to the sunlight and the smell of asphalt, she felt a flicker of pride she hadn't known since her father was alive. But pride draws envy, like a flame draws moths. One Monday morning, Claire arrived to find her toolbox tipped over, wrenches scattered across the floor, and a fresh crack in the garage window. Nothing was stolen, just chaos left behind, deliberate and cruel. She cleaned up silently, jaw clenched, refusing to give whoever did it the satisfaction of seeing her break. By Friday, the real sabotage came. A customer stormed in, waving a bill from another shop accusing her of sloppy work. "They said you didn't tighten the bolts right," the man snapped. "Could have killed me on the highway." Claire's stomach dropped. She knew she hadn't made that mistake, but word spread faster than the truth. By evening, 3 more cancellations had come in. That night, Tommy found her hunched over the bench again, head buried in her arms. "Kid, I've been around long enough to smell a setup," he muttered, patting her shoulder. "Some folks don't like seeing you prove 'em wrong, but you don't back down, you hear? You don't hand them the win." Claire nodded, but her chest felt heavy, as if all the grease and grit of the shop had lodged in her lungs. What if they're right? What if I'm just pretending, she thought, staring at her father's notebook like it might answer her fears. Meanwhile, across town, Derek Whitmore's name was unraveling faster than anyone expected. His father's real estate empire had bet big on a luxury development that now sat half-finished skeletons of steel and glass baking under the sun. Suppliers whispered of unpaid invoices, contractors pulled out, and the once untouchable Whitmore reputation sagged like a balloon losing air. Derek doubled down on his arrogance, showing up at boardrooms with swagger and empty promises, but behind closed doors, even his closest allies were slipping away. "The Whitmore kid's not his old man," one investor sneered in a leaked recording. "He's just a spoiled brat playing dress-up." The collapse should have satisfied Claire, but instead it weighed on her. She wasn't built for vengeance. She was built for fixing. And yet Derek's smirk still lived in her head, a ghost she couldn't exorcise no matter how many engines she rebuilt. Worse, the sabotage at her shop grew bolder. One morning, she found sugar poured into a customer's gas tank while the car sat overnight. Another day, flyers appeared around town claiming her certifications were fake. Each attack chipped at her resolve until one stormy evening she nearly broke. She sat at the kitchen table, Ethan coloring at her side, the unpaid bills spread like a map of failure between them. The thunder outside cracked so loud he jumped, dropping his crayon. She pulled him close, her tears hidden in his hair. That's when he whispered, "Mom, Grandpa would be proud if you kept fixing things. You fix everything." The words pierced deeper than Derek's insults ever could. From the mouth of a child who knew only truth, they anchored her. She wiped her eyes, kissed his forehead, and said, "Then I'll keep fixing, kiddo. No matter what." That night, she changed course. She installed cameras in the shop, locked every toolbox, and started documenting every repair with photos and receipts. If someone wanted to ruin her, she'd meet them with proof and persistence. What Claire didn't realize was that her storm and Derek's storm were about to collide. His empire was crumbling. Hers was crawling through sabotage, and fate was quietly tightening the bolts of both their lives until the pressure snapped. The Whitmore empire was crumbling faster than anyone could patch the holes. Half-built towers stood frozen against the skyline, suppliers walked off job sites, and crews sat idle waiting for trucks that never came. The biggest blow landed one Monday morning when the fleet of construction haulers, dozens of massive trucks worth millions, shut down one by one, engines coughing, dashboards lighting up with error codes no one could decipher. By noon, the billion-dollar project was paralyzed, and angry investors were demanding answers. Engineers in crisp suits huddled around diagnostic tablets, sweating under the summer sun, each hour bleeding more money than most families earned in a year. Derek paced the dirt lot like a caged animal, barking orders that no one obeyed. His father, Richard Whitmore, the man who had built the empire with ruthless precision, stood off to the side, jaw-clenched eyes scanning the chaos. Finally, Richard said the words Derek least expected: "Call her. The Bennett girl." Derek spun around, his pride choking him. "Her dad. She runs a shack of a garage. She's not qualified for this." But Richard's tone was iron. "Neither are the so-called experts you've wasted $500,000 on. She fixed what no one else could once. You will call her." By the time Claire arrived, dust still clinging to her coveralls from her own morning repairs, the scene looked like a battlefield. Dozens of trucks lined up, lifeless workers leaning on shovels, muttering about lost paychecks. She felt every eye turn to her, the whispers crackling through the crowd. "That's her. She's just a kid. She's the single mom mechanic, right?" And then she saw him, Derek, standing stiff in his tailored shirt, his face a mask of disdain, but his eyes betraying something else: desperation. Claire ignored him. She walked straight to the first truck, her father's notebook tucked under her arm like a talisman. The smell of diesel mixed with frustration in the air as she climbed into the cab, listening, feeling, tracing the wires and sensors. Minutes stretched into an hour, then two. The engineers scoffed quietly, muttering about wasted time, but Claire tuned them out. She remembered her dad's words: "Every machine has a soul. Listen long enough, and it'll tell you what's wrong." Finally, as the sun dipped low, she found it. A calibration error in the electronic throttle systems, tiny misalignments that cascaded into full system shutdowns. Simple to fix if you knew where to look, catastrophic if you didn't. She stood, wiping her hands, her voice calm but firm. "It's not your engines, it's your calibration. Whoever programmed these systems overlooked the heat variance. Your trucks are shutting down to protect themselves. I can reset them, but it'll take time." Silence. Then laughter from one of the engineers. "That's your big discovery, a calibration error." Please, his words cut off when Claire climbed back into the cab, punched a few commands, and turned the key. The truck rumbled to life, smooth and steady, its idle like a heartbeat returning after a long flat line. Workers erupted in cheers, the sound echoing across the site. One by one, Claire moved down the line, resetting, reprogramming, bringing the dead fleet back to roaring life. By the fifth truck, even the engineers who mocked her were craning their necks to watch. By the 10th, no one was laughing anymore. Richard Whitmore stepped forward, his face unreadable until he clapped once, slow and deliberate. "Miss Bennet," he said, his deep voice carrying over the crowd, "you just saved this project." He extended his hand and she shook it firmly, grease-stained fingers against manicured wealth, the image of respect earned the hard way. Derek, though, stood frozen, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting between the trucks, his father and Claire. Every engine that roared back to life felt like another nail hammered into the coffin of his arrogance. She hadn't just proven him wrong in a small-town garage anymore. She had humiliated him on the grand stage of his own empire. And the worst part, she hadn't done it to humiliate him. She'd done it because people's jobs, families, and futures were on the line. That truth cut deeper than any insult. As the last truck thundered awake, workers clapped her on the back, shouting her name, their cheers drowning out the sound of Derek's pride crumbling. For the first time in her life, Claire didn't just feel like her father's daughter trying to live up to his shadow. She felt like Claire Bennett, mechanic mother fighter, the woman who had fixed what no one else could. Standing amidst the roaring fleet and the stunned silence of men who once doubted her, Claire realized this was more than vindication. This was the moment the world finally saw her not as an underdog, but as the equal of anyone, no matter their title, wealth, or arrogance. And Derek Whitmore, for the first time in his charmed, hollow life, was left speechless. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Local news stations ran headlines like "Small-Town Mechanic Saves Billion-Dollar Project," while investors who had nearly walked out the day before now demanded meetings with Richard Whitmore, crediting Claire as the turning point. Workers stopped by her garage on their way home just to shake her hand, dropping off cookies, pies, and thank you notes, as if she had personally saved each of their families. For the first time in years, Claire felt her father's name carry pride again, not pity. But not everyone was celebrating. Derek stayed out of sight that day, hiding in the shadows of his family's glass towers, his phone buzzing with texts he couldn't bear to open. "Your father gave the credit to a mechanic," one read. Another, "So much for the Whitmore legacy. Guess you've been replaced." Each word was a blow to his ego, a reminder that the empire he thought would always be his had slipped further from his grasp, and worse, into the grease-stained hands of the woman he had once dismissed as nothing. Claire, however, wasn't basking in glory. She was back at the shop, fixing brake pads on a minivan, Ethan perched on a stool nearby, reading a comic aloud in a dramatic voice. Fame didn't matter. What mattered was proving that she belonged here in the world her father had built brick by brick. When Tommy stopped by with a grin and a newspaper folded under his arm, she brushed him off with a laugh. "Don't put me on a pedestal, Tommy. I'm just doing my job." But he shook his head, tapping the headline. "No, kid. You're doing more than that. You're changing what people believe is possible." Late that afternoon, a sleek sedan pulled up outside the garage. Derek stepped out, the swagger gone from his walk, his shirt wrinkled like he hadn't slept. For a moment, Claire considered sending him away, but something in his eyes, tired, heavy, stripped of pride, made her pause. He stood there awkwardly, hands shoved in his pockets, before speaking. "I owe you an apology," he said, the words catching like gravel in his throat. I was cruel. I underestimated you. And yesterday, you proved not just me, but everyone wrong." Claire crossed her arms, wiping grease from her fingers onto a rag. She could have humiliated him in return, reminded him of every sneer and insult. Instead, she met his gaze steadily. "I didn't do it for you, Derek. I did it for the people who are about to lose their jobs, for families who couldn't afford another missed paycheck. That project wasn't yours to save or ruin, it belonged to them. Her voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of her conviction. For the first time, Derek dropped his gaze. "I know," he whispered, and there was no smirk. No shield of arrogance, left only regret. Claire didn't forgive him outright, but she didn't need to. The imbalance between them had shifted forever, and that was enough. As Derek drove away, Claire looked back at Ethan, who was watching from the doorway wide-eyed. "Everything okay, Mom?" he asked. She knelt down, brushing his hair back. "Yeah, kiddo," she said softly. Sometimes people finally see the truth, even if it takes longer than it should. And for Claire, that was victory enough. Months passed, and Bennett's auto no longer looked like the fading relic it once was. The cracked window had been replaced, the walls repainted by volunteers who showed up unasked, and the lot was filled with cars from every corner of town. What had started as a struggling single mom's fight to survive had grown into something bigger, a place where young apprentices, kids with no direction, second chances, and stubborn hearts came to learn not just about engines, but about persistence. Claire taught them the way her father once taught her, patient, hands-on, never mocking mistakes, but guiding through them. And when she caught Ethan slipping into the garage after school, mimicking her stance with a wrench in hand, she felt a swell of pride deeper than any headline could bring. Derek didn't vanish. Humbled, he reappeared from time to time, quieter now, more careful with his words. Once he even sent over a shipment of new tools, unsigned, but obvious, as if to say sorry, without forcing the weight of apology onto her again. Claire accepted them not as gifts, but as reminders that even arrogance can bend when faced with truth. She didn't hate him anymore. If anything, she pitied the boy he still was inside the man's expensive suit, a boy who had never been taught that respect was earned, not inherited. On quiet evenings, Claire would sit at the same workbench where her father once smoked his pipe and mapped out solutions for stubborn engines. She'd run her fingers over his old notebook, now filled with her own notes alongside his, and she realized the real inheritance he'd left her wasn't a building or a business, it was belief. Belief that nothing broken was beyond repair. Not a truck, not a dream, not even a person. Her story spread further than she ever expected, whispered from diner booths, to union halls, from construction sites, to Sunday churches. People didn't talk about the mechanic who fixed the Whitmore trucks anymore. They talked about the woman who stood her ground, who proved herself without arrogance, and who built something lasting out of dignity and grit. As Claire locked the shop one evening, Ethan slipped his hand into hers, his small fingers sticky from melting ice cream. "Mom," he asked, glancing up with wide, curious eyes, "what if I can't fix things like you and Grandpa?" Claire bent down, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Then fix the things only you can. Because fixing isn't about cars, kiddo, it's about never giving up on what matters." And maybe that was the truth she had been chasing all along. Machines break, people stumble, empires fall. But resilience, the quiet, stubborn will to stand back up, that's the soul that keeps everything alive.